In tonight's Government Insider, another fiscal cliff. Last week, Congress passed a continuing resolution preventing a federal shutdown. But this kick-the-can measure runs out December 11th. So what happens then? For Insight, we're joined tonight by Joe Davidson, Federal Diary columnist with the Washington Post. Joe, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So many credit outgoing House Speaker John Boehner's surprise resignation with preventing yet another shutdown. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy is expected to take Boehner's place. Right. What does that mean for chances of shutdown in December and beyond?
Well, of course, it still remains to be seen whether or not McCarthy actually becomes Speaker. Jason Chaffetz from Utah also is now in the race, among, I think, at least one other. I think the December 11th deadline that we are now under looms large, particularly for federal employees, taxpayers as well, because at that point we might undergo the same kind of crisis or governing by brinksmanship that we saw last week, that we saw 2 years ago when there was a 16-day shutdown. Right now, everybody is hopeful that Congress will come to a budget agreement before the December 11th deadline. President Obama has said he will not sign another temporary funding measure known as a continuing resolution, or CR, which is what we're operating under now. And so between now and December 11th, clearly Congress needs to get its work done.
Like other Republican leaders, McCarthy has strongly argued against big government and perhaps is seen by many federal workers as unfriendly to their situation. We know he's voted against giving them pay raises or substantial pay raises. What do we know about him?
Well, he hasn't been an out-front leader when it comes to federal employee issues because, of course, he has to worry about the whole gamut of the federal agenda. But we can learn at least something about his inclinations by the ratings that the two largest federal employee unions give him. He is voted essentially with the American Federation of Government Employees position 0% of the time last year in 2014. And for the National Treasury Employees Union rating, that was only 20%, meaning he voted with their positions only 20% of the time. So clearly this indicates an individual who does not vote along with the wishes of the large federal employee organizations.
You mentioned Jason Chaffetz, the representative. On Sunday, he did formally announce his bid to become the next House Speaker. I'm wondering what your take is. Who would be more empathetic from a federal worker standpoint, Chaffetz or McCarthy?
More empathetic, that's an interesting way to put it. You know, I've talked with Jason Chaffetz a number of times in his role as first as chairman of the Federal Workforce Committee going back a few years, and now as chairman of the House Government Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which deals with federal employee issues. And you know, Jason Chaffetz will say all of the right things, I think, or at least some of the right things that federal employees want to hear, but that doesn't mean he's going to vote along with them. He was just earlier today quoted as saying that he thought that the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, was wrong for essentially guaranteeing no shutdown before this last crisis. And so and with McCarthy, I think he, based on his voting record, I don't think that federal employees necessarily should expect much. But we haven't necessarily heard him voice a lot of positions as it relates to federal workers. I think with either Chaffetz or McCarthy, you're going to get a conservative Republican who doesn't look upon federal employee issues favorably, certainly not to the extent that the unions and other federal employee organizations would like them to look favorably upon those issues in terms of their voting record.
Let's switch gears, Joe, and talk about the hack at the Office of Personnel Management. Earlier this year, the agency announced that it had this major data breach that put personal information of more than 21 million federal workers at risk. And just now, employees are finally receiving this official notification and instructions on what to do about this.
Right.
Why has it taken so long for OPM to respond to the hack?
Well, I think in fairness to OPM, and there's certainly a lot of criticism that could go their way. On this particular point, though, I think the magnitude of sending out 21.5 million letters. I mean, that's not something you simply stick a stamp on an envelope and run down to the post office. So that's a big job. It requires an outside contractor. It took a while for them to get this outside contractor. They did hire an outside contractor to do some of these things for a smaller breach earlier in the year, and then that contractor had a lot of problems. The contractor was essentially overwhelmed by the amount of calls and business they were getting. So I think this time they wanted to make sure they did it right. They had a contractor in place, and that frankly took time. Having said that, I think there's still a lot of dissatisfaction among federal employees about this whole situation. After all, if your personal information, in some cases your fingerprints for some 5 million federal employees, your Social Security information, financial information for past and present federal employees, applicants, contractors, and their families, well, that gives people plenty to be upset about, even beyond the amount of time, which in this case might have been reasonable for them, for OPM to get this information to the victims of this hack attack.
OPM has acknowledged it needs to work harder to regain the trust of federal employees. Maybe an obvious statement at this point, but how are the workers' unions responding to that?
Well, you know, a few months ago, a couple of months ago at least, the two largest unions filed suit against the Office of Personnel Management because they disagreed with the handling by that agency of this situation. I think that the unions generally have a good working relationship with the Office of Personnel Management, Beth Colbert, who is now the acting director, as well as the Obama administration as a whole. So while they have filed a suit, they continue to work with the administration, I think, in a cooperative way. And I think they also appreciate that it does take time to send out, you know, more than 20 million letters. And so these letters will be going out from now until probably close to the end of November. And so they don't seem to have a beef with that because of the, you know, the mechanics involved in all of this. But they are upset that this breach happened to begin with.
Joe Davidson, Federal Diary columnist with the Washington Post. Joe, as always, thank you.
Thank you.